Well, hey there, it's Matt Adair. Welcome to another episode of the Five Factors podcast. So glad to have you here as we have a conversation today that helps you build a great church and an even better life. You know, Five Factors is an entire leadership framework that's designed to help you pay attention to what matters most in your leadership. So one of the things that I love about where we are as a church culture here in the United States, at least, and really in the West, is that we're about 2 to 3 generations into recovering a biblical pattern of discipleship that includes building networks of leaders inside the church. And so if you're going to build a network of leaders, if you're going to have the right kind of leaders around you, then you need to train those leaders to be followers of Jesus, and you need to train them to be fellow workers in Jesus' mission. Now, that's an amazing opportunity that's there for us, but the leaders in your church are just like the leaders in my church, the leaders like every other church that we're around. They're busy, they're overwhelmed, and they just simply don't have the time and energy to show up at regular meetings inside a church building. So I called up Scott Magdalein, who's become a friend of mine, and I asked him to come on and talk about a different way that you can train every single leader in your church. This is a fantastic platform that he's created called Trained Up that I think is doing just phenomenal work in helping so many churches. I think it could be helpful for you to reimagine how we make sure that our leaders who are busy and overwhelmed get the right kind of training so that they can thrive in their work as a leader. So it fits very much into what we're trying to do in this podcast and our entire framework of leadership. If you're going to lead at the highest level for the longest time, if you're going to thrive as a leader, then you need access to not only new ideas, but to new resources as well. And so Trained Up is a world-class platform, and this is a fun conversation with Scott. I'm always enjoy getting together with him. So dig in, pull up a chair. Here's my conversation with Scott Magdalein from Trained Up. So I'm here with the one, the only Scott Magdalein. How you doing, man?
Good, and definitely the only. There's like nobody named Magdalene.
I figured that was a pretty safe bet.
Yeah.
But, you know, I was just talking about how fantastic you are, but you're the only Scott Magdalein on the planet. So
But unique.
Okay,
I mean,
we'll
unique.
take that too. Yeah, unique. There it is. It is, man. Thanks so much for doing this today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's good to catch up with you and hang out again. It's been a while since we talked.
Yeah, it has been. So if you and I were sitting in the same coffee shop in the afternoon, early afternoon, so that helps us, you know, we're getting older. We can't drink coffee, you know, too late in the day. So what are you drinking? Are you drinking?
Barista when I ask for decaf if it's after 3 o'clock.
There you go. So okay, so 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and you're not drinking decaf yet. What are you drinking? Are you going coffee? Are you going tea? What are you going here?
If it's afternoon, I'll go with a latte probably with it.
Okay.
Yeah, and if it's 2 in the afternoon, I'll go with a normal latte. If it's 3:30 or 4, it's a decaf latte.
Nice.
In the morning, it's just straight coffee, just because the bitterness wakes me up as much as the caffeine does.
Yeah, it's true. So you a dark roast, medium roast guy?
I don't know. I think maybe probably medium
It's
dark.
whatever they put in front of you.
Just whatever. I'm really like the least picky coffee guy. Really am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited about talking today about something you and I both are passionate about, and that's helping develop and train leaders. And so you started Trained Up in 2015 and had an opportunity to work with a lot of leaders, a lot of churches. I want to go back to kind of when y'all started and kind of what was the genesis of the idea? How did you come up with the idea for Trained Up in the first place?
Well, I came up with the idea for Trained Up. Honestly, I came up with the idea for Trained Up when I was sitting on a beach with Boyd Bettis.
Yeah.
You know Boyd. I don't.
Yeah, Boyd's a church planter in Jacksonville, Florida.
Yeah, he's also my pastor. He's my brother-in-law, church planter. And we were sitting on a beach, and we were talking about, because we're both in ministry, we were talking about the challenge of getting some of our volunteers trained and new volunteers, wanting them to be trained, but like not wanting to have like meetings every month to train new volunteers. And so we were both like, why don't you just build something that'll make it easier to train people when they join a team? And that way they can show up to serve on a Sunday more like their first time serving, and they're like ready to go instead of kind of not knowing what to do.
Yeah.
And so I built that first version kind of to scratch our own itch. And then it kind of like expanded from there. I started using it in other areas, and in district church started using it more in leadership and deacon stuff and elder stuff. But yeah, it started on the beach actually.
That's where all good ideas began, on a beach somewhere. So as you got that going and y'all are working on it in-house and you start maybe talking with other churches about it, when did you know that you were onto something, that this is kind of an important thing that we needed to provide for churches and church leaders?
Probably a couple months after I built the first version and started using it and seeing, wow, people actually watch the videos and they appreciate showing up to church like ready to serve, and leaders appreciate not having one more meeting to go to just so that they can, talk about a book that they've read already. And so, once my people liked it, and some other pastors that I told about it, they were like, "Oh yeah, can we use it? Can we have this?" I was like, "Okay, maybe it's something." And that first version was rough, man. We're not on the first version anymore. We're on the second version. It's completely rebuilt and redesigned. But the first version was rough, but it scratched the itch well enough that churches were, like ministry leaders, pastors, were still wanting to use it despite all the warts, because it was solving that problem of being able to provide training without having to schedule another meeting.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a side conversation here that's probably worth having, and you as somebody who's done design and helped with YouVersion and get all that going and all that kind of stuff is, and I remember seeing something that you wrote when you were redesigning version 2, and you said, look, we have this responsibility to create something that isn't just functional, but there's a sense of beauty and design here. So maybe chat up some pastors who. And look, everybody's got so much on their plate and we're just trying to be helpful, but maybe we're not paying enough attention to design and detail. And so talk a little bit, not necessarily about the functionality of why that's important, but how that matters within the kingdom.
Yeah, for sure. So, design is much about looking nice as it is about building trust. And so, like, you see somebody, let's say you see somebody walking, down the hallway of a mall or down the sidewalk or whatever, and somebody's dressed nice and looks nice and well kept, and then another person is not dressed nice and well kept, and just our human nature, we make a judgment call, right? And so if I were to say I need that person to watch my car, or to, hey, can you look at my look after my computer while I'm sitting at Starbucks, I'm naturally going to trust somebody who looks nice versus somebody who looks disheveled and like they haven't showered in a while, or they haven't slept in a while, kind of thing. And so we tend to make trust calls, judgment calls, based on what we judge books by their cover. That's just what we do. And so when like if we're talking about like a church website, or if you show up to a church and the landscaping is not nice, like all of those things, all those design things build into trust. And so it either builds trust with people. This is a legit organization. These people care about what they do. They care about doing things well. In fact, like if they care about their landscaping and their property looks nice, or their website looks nice, then they probably will also do a good job with watching my kid, or probably do a good job with, like in respecting my time that I give them an hour on Sunday morning or 2 hours during the week or whatever, that they're going to do a good job with that. And I'm not going to waste my time with that. Yeah. And so to me, design is a big thing with trust more than it is with impressing anybody.
Yeah. Yeah. So help the pastor, the church planner out there who's just getting started, and know that there's a scarcity of resources and there's scarcity of time, and they haven't worked or trained up yet. And so they haven't cultivated everything they want to, whether it's the ethos or the right leaders around them. And they just hear that and they go, oh man, our website's a mess and the building that we have it's kind of okay. So maybe help them in this season of where they are now versus maybe where they want to be in the future.
Sure. Yeah. So I would say, step one is most always to simplify. Most bad design is just overcomplicated design. Most people understand colors that go well together and don't go well together. So when it comes to website design or graphic design, like simplify it. If you need to, like that's one of the things I like about District is really simple design at District Church. By the way, it's the church I go to. Like they've got great design, and it's not because it's, super snazzy or really, over the top. In fact, it's very understated. Like all the slides on, like little stuff like slides on Sunday morning, it's white text on a black screen. It's very simple. There's very little movement to it. The stage design is really just one big backdrop. That's honest. Most of the time it's a flat single color backdrop with just good lighting. And so like all that stuff doesn't take up a lot of expense, and it doesn't take you like hiring a really expensive designer to put that stuff together. It really just means simplifying down to what you can do and do well without having to worry about trying to do more complicated things well, because it gets much more difficult to do complicated things well. And the same thing goes with property. So there's two churches near my house. One has really complicated shrubbery and trees and like all this kind of stuff. And every couple of weeks it starts to look shabby because it's like there's a lot to do with it, a lot to clean up and stuff. And then there's another church down the street that always looks sharp, but it's really just a lawn with some like box shrubs that are very low maintenance around the edge of the building. And it's like, well, one looks like it's kept up, but it's obviously less maintenance than the one that has a lot more that has, that gets run down and, they're waiting for a volunteer, or, the landscaping company's a few days behind and it's looking shabby. So, and it's just little stuff, simplifying.
Yeah, it seems like that if simple and sustainable is going to help you today, and especially if you're prioritizing the things that matter most. So in that sense of, man, we've got so much and we feel overwhelmed by things, what can you simplify in order to make it sustainable? So you do you do good work week in and week out, and that's in your children's environment, that's in your process in terms of check-in, it's what you do in terms of your liturgy, all those type of things, and that kind of sense of clean, simple, that's going to make you sustainable, give you a good opportunity there. So that's good side comment. We'll come back here. So in the 3 years since y'all launched Trained Up, what are some of the things that you feel like you've learned that maybe reinforce some original ideas, or maybe have surprised you, some things that are now kind of core values for you and your team that maybe you didn't have when you launched?
Well, what's funny is, like, since I've launched I've kind of gone through a couple of seasons. When I first launched, I made the assumption that every church cares about and thinks about volunteer training the same way that I think about it, or that, Boyd and I think about it, kind of thing. And in reality, they don't all think about it the same way. So that's part of the redesign of the platform. So
talk about that.
So last year, exactly a year ago, actually, it's April when we're recording this now. And so April in 2018, in case you're like way far in the future listening to one of Matt's old episodes. And so it was a year ago that we rebuilt it. And what we did is we just made it much easier to use. So the first version was like when you started up, you had to, you were starting from ground zero. There was no content that came with it. There was no outlines. There was nothing done for you. It was kind of like a blank slate of a learning management system. And so what we did is I realized that not everybody comes to online training with an idea of what they want to build already. I did, because I'd already been thinking about it for a while. I didn't realize how much I'd been thinking about it already. But for other ministry leaders, they kind of are discovering the idea of online training. So they don't have a preconceived notion of what they're going to build or what it should be. And so what we did with version 2 is we made it really easy to get started. We have a library of over 600 videos that are already done for volunteer training and leadership development kind of stuff. They're already built into courses for people. And so when you sign up, you just have the ability to go in and browse what courses you want and then click import. And so you can bring those over to your account to put them in front of your people. And we also made it really easy to start doing your own training without having to, put together a big outline, without having to do a lot of planning, without having to get together a production team to shoot videos. You can do it right with your webcam, right inside the course builder. And all you have to do is just start talking, essentially. And if you can talk as a trainer, which most ministry leaders, that's like their strong suit, is they can talk, is you can train your people pretty simply. So we essentially, to boil that back down, we went from it's really hard to get started to it's dead simple to get started. And we did a lot of stuff for ministry leaders and kind of covered those bases for them.
Yeah. So beyond that, what are some of the other things that have kind of come out as y'all have, because one of the things I love about it, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk, is because you are working with a lot of churches. And so instead of just giving kind of anecdotal evidence about what's real in terms of volunteer training, y'all are getting feedback, y'all are seeing what is actually happening, what works, what doesn't work. So maybe for a couple of the people that are like, this is interesting, I thought about this, I've thought about volunteer training before, but maybe they haven't done it, or maybe they just don't think it's working really well in their church right now.
Yeah, so when I first started Trained Up, I had volunteer training was like a big idea, and we were aiming at all volunteer training. And as we went forward, we realized that the lion's share of volunteer training does happen and should happen right at the very beginning when a volunteer signs up. When they're interested, I'm on fire, I'm ready to start serving in kids ministry or youth ministry or greeters or whatever it is. That's when they're most interested in and most ready to take training, to go through the rigmarole of sitting through videos and answering questions. They're most ready to kind of put up with a follow-up survey to gauge their experience. Their motivation is at an all-time high. So what we realized is that if we can make it really easy for churches to do onboarding training for volunteers, then we can make ongoing training, so training those volunteers over time, much less of a job, because they're already trained on the key skills, the core policies, all that kind of stuff that they need to know, then stuff that doesn't really change much over time.
Yeah.
And so that way the ongoing training can mostly be things like curriculum updates or policy changes, or really just, appreciations and reminders about how, to show up on time and make sure you know your curriculum if you're a teacher and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So the onboarding training has become like the key place where we can help churches, and we've seen churches, winning with volunteer training is if they train them when they're motivated.
Right. Which makes sense. Again, I think everybody understands that, that person who raises a hand and they jump in that first time, that probably is maybe not maximum motivation, because maybe they really do grow to love the work. But at the beginning, there's a lot of interest, and I probably a sense of fear of, I don't exactly know what I'm supposed to be doing or how things go around here. So,
right. Or what my expectations are, like like I'm getting into this ministry, what are their expectations of me? And as a volunteer, I want to make a good first impression. So, kind of go along with the rules.
Yeah. So for a church that's been doing, let's say, nursery volunteers, and it's kind of been sign them up and dump them in, and there hasn't been any onboarding, just in terms of when you're talking about onboarding, is that a kind of a three different things that we need to get across from people? Like, chat us up a little bit on terms of what onboarding looks like in the average church when it comes to nursery volunteers.
What it looks like in the average church, or what it should look like?
Well, what it should look like. Let's go for that.
Okay.
We're going to cast vision here today, Scott.
There we go. Awesome. So when I do coaching, I do a lot of coaching. I talk to, a dozen ministry leaders every week on like individual coaching calls like this, specifically talking about things like how can we do onboarding better and how can we implement, leadership pipeline with an online piece. And so when it comes to onboarding volunteers, I talk about it in a 3-step process. Somebody signs up and they're ready to go. There needs to be a communication like flow integrated. So when somebody signs up, there's a follow-up. There may be a phone call follow-up from the ministry leader, and then also some communicating some clear next steps. Of course, one of those next steps is to actually show up on a first serve. We call it first serve Sunday, but show up for their first serve Sunday so they get them scheduled. But one of those steps should be some sort of onboarding training, and that's, of course, so as a ministry leader, I want them to show up and have know the rules. Know when to show up, what time to show up, know where to go when they show up early on a Sunday morning. Because if they're volunteering for the first time, they probably don't know where to go when they show up. They don't know about your volunteer powwow on a Sunday morning, or they don't know about the breakfast that you provide or whatever. But also, like, what they need to know what to wear. They need to know, who they're going to be working with, what the different roles are that are opportunities usually, because they typically don't sign up for a specific role. They typically sign up for kind of a ministry in general. So you can go through, like, you can be a room leader or a room helper. You can be a hallway roamer. You can be a handshaker. You can be, whatever it is. And so some orientation to the ministry as a whole. And also, so that's like what I want them to know showing up, but also communicates to the volunteer. Well, there's a couple of things for the volunteer on their behalf. Of course, it communicates, I care about you knowing, what you're going to be doing, and I care about you being well equipped for it. But it also builds confidence for the volunteer. So as a volunteer, if I show up knowing what to do and knowing where to go and knowing that I was supposed to wear my shirt, or knowing that I need to wear solid colors on a Sunday morning, or knowing that I always, need to find my name tag, all those little things that existing volunteers already know because they've been around for a while, then I show up not looking like the person that's out of place. I show up not looking like a sore thumb. I show up not inconveniencing people because I'm trying to ask and, having somebody hold my hand down the hallway. So it makes me more confident to show up, which means that my first experience is going to be better, which means my overall view and understanding of the ministry is going to be better. My view of the leadership and, like, are they doing a good job is going to be better. So everything, in my opinion, everything is improved by really good onboarding, all the way to the point of reducing volunteer churn. We call it volunteer churn, which is just the rate of the number of people that cancel or that drop out of your volunteer core. So,
So talk a little bit about details, because I think it's somebody could be listening to this going, got it, just took good notes, and now I have an onboarding sequence. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate that. So in terms of the benefit of Trained Up and how Trained Up makes that easier, creates a little bit of a different pathway for people. Help us to see that kind of picture clearly versus the guy who's just going to scratch and claw it out and go back and hand this to his nursery director and say, you need an onboarding sequence.
Yeah. So here, I'm going to talk about in terms of using online training versus not using online training. And then within the online training, I'll kind of explain the differences there. But online training versus not having online training means that when somebody joins your team, they can go through an onboarding or an orientation kind of learning experience before they show up, instead of having to show up not knowing what's going on. Number one. And that means you can get them involved quicker while their interest level is still high. You're not waiting a month or 2 months to get them to join. And that's the second kind of win, is that because they're able to do their online training, they're training online and on their own pace. You don't have to wait for the next training orientation to come around on the calendar for people to be able to join a team, and hopefully that their calendar, their own schedule is open and available for that same time. So essentially, it gets people involved quicker, and it matches with their motivation level when they start. And then within online training, the difference between Trained Up and say some of our competition in online training is using a web page with a YouTube video, or trying to use a Google form or some kind of free form builder. What's great about Trained Up is it makes it much more organized. It makes it much easier to get your training courses built. And then, of course, much easier to track training progress. So you have, on a regular basis, people signing up. You're able to go into Trained Up and see progress for everyone in the system. And you can also train across disciplines. So you may have one kind of general or volunteer orientation. You may have a couple of courses for different ministries in your church, or even you might have a couple of courses for different roles within your ministry. So if I'm a children's ministry leader and I have roles like a room leader and also have security role, and I might have a check-in desk role, those are very different skills that those people need to learn. And so you might have a different course for each different type of role. And Trained Up kind of brings all of that stuff together to make it really simple for a ministry leader to manage all of that in one place, instead of having to build separate systems and kind of connect them together.
Yeah. So you mentioned onboarding, you mentioned kind of the sort of the ongoing continual training. In terms of what you advise churches to do, we'll keep within the realm of nursery volunteers in terms of training. How do you help them think through how often, what content, how often should we do this? What's kind of standard operating procedure for a church that wants to do a good job, wants to serve their volunteer leaders well? How do you help them think through that?
So when it comes to training, assuming that they have a good onboarding system, that really lightens the load. Like I said earlier, it really lightens the load for ongoing training. And so when I talk to coach ministry leaders through this kind of thinking through or rethinking through their training process, I talk to them about a strong onboarding process, and then a couple of times a year for reminder kind of training and for best practices training. So not just reminder about our policies, but reminder about things about how to cool down temper tantrums with 2-year-olds, and how to handle, nervous parents, or how to receive a child on a Sunday morning from a parent that might look like they're, had a wrong morning maybe. And how to hand a child over who maybe have been crying the whole time. You don't want to be handing just a kid that's lost his mind for an hour over to the parent. And so little things like the best practices on how to do that stuff well, how to treat parents and treat kids well. That kind of reminder training a couple of times a year really goes a long way to help volunteers feel like they're continually being equipped, feel like they're ready and confident to keep going in the role. And that kind of stuff can happen in Trained Up. And that's the other thing, is that it doesn't always have to happen in Trained Up. So Trained Up doesn't have to completely replace all of the volunteer training that you do. I say that Trained Up is remarkable, much better than any other system for onboarding training. It's a remarkable, best system for that kind of low level, best practices, skills, reminder stuff. But if there's some training that you need to do in person, you can do both. You can still have Trained Up that does high accountability, high accessibility training on one hand, and then have training meetings that are more fellowship oriented, where there's some reminders that happen, there's some policy coverage that happens, but it's a lot of just like having a meal together with your volunteer team, and building relationships with those people. So we talk about it as a both and, where Trained Up serves one purpose and training meetings can still serve, a really valuable purpose over here.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that is happening more and more, that idea of flipping the classroom, go consume this content on your own, and then we're going to show up here, and over a meal or over dessert, we're going to talk about what we did learn together, instead of having to everybody kind of process stuff. So this is extremely helpful for people who aren't, they're nonverbal processors. They're not going to just hear it and then just automatically they need time to think and consider and wrestle with, and then they can come in and can really add value to the conversation in a way that doesn't happen.
It's actually a good point, because we've been talking this whole time about volunteer training, but honestly, like there's this whole other section of leadership development, leadership training that Trained Up really is great at supporting, but it really kind of does exist in a separate kind of discipline of training. And so the churches that are using Trained Up in the leadership space are using it like you're talking about, like a flipped classroom model, where there's an information transfer that happens on Trained Up. There's accountability to it, so I know that they went through the book, they read the book, or they watched the videos or whatever. But those things are a precursor or a supplement to in-person coaching, in-person mentoring, small groups of leaders that are going through a development process, like a pipeline kind of process. And Trained Up is a piece of a system that is a little bit higher level, a little more holistic than just information transfer.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that when we think about a leadership pipeline, again, what we're talking about, and some of you have heard this, it's becoming something that's more and more common in churches, but if you don't, we're basically talking about a way to recruit, train, and encourage every single leader in your church. And that goes all the way from board level all the way down to volunteers. Scott and I both believe that volunteers are leaders in real ways. And so you want to do a good job recruiting them and onboarding them, and then want to make sure that you do a good job training them. And that gives you the best opportunity to be an encouragement to them, so that they don't just feel like you're using them. They don't feel like just a number. They feel like you're trying to help them do the work that they're interested in doing. And so it's a smart opportunity to do that. In terms of when you think about that idea of developing staff, developing leaders, as y'all are working more and more in that space, what are some of the other areas that y'all are exploring that you're going, look, this is an undervalued under a place that isn't getting enough attention right now when it comes to doing a good job in developing staff and elders and those kind of higher levels of leadership?
Well, I think one area that has been a traditionally kind of easy way to provide some development, but also doesn't add a ton to a pastor's or a senior pastor's plate. Because honestly, at that level, it's usually the senior pastor or lead pastor or maybe the second man in charge, right-hand man, executive pastor kind of person who's responsible for all of that, on top of a full load of pastoring, of pastoral care, of preaching prep, of business management, all the kind of stuff that goes into leading a church at a senior level. And then it's also, I need to prepare and develop my staff. And not that it's a low priority or that it's not important, but it's a task that can be easily kind of sloughed off to a short chat during a staff meeting or a book assignment, and then maybe following up on the book assignment. And so, and I'm not attacking or kind of down talking pastors because they already have a full plate. But the challenge is, how do we do more than do I just like put a book list in front of my staff and say, hey, I'd love for you to have these read before the end of the year. I'll follow up from time to time during staff meeting. Between that and something that's more like really intense, like one of our churches, the worship center, has a full leadership development academy that's built out, that based on, the core of it is on Trained Up, and that helps to support an in-person mentoring model. There's some ways to do in between. You can use Trained Up for what's fun. So there's a pastor yesterday I was doing some coaching with him. He was talking about, he's got a staff of about 5 or 6, mid-sized church running about, I guess, 700 to 800 on a weekend. And he's got several other part-time and lay leaders. And he was talking about wanting to do staff development with them and how he could use Trained Up. And he was saying, is it possible that I could record brief kind of synopses of what the Lord is doing in my heart when I'm reading in books, and I can do all that kind of stuff into my webcam with Trained Up and share that with my team and ask them follow-up questions so they can, tell me what God's doing in their life, what they're getting out of the book that they're reading. And that way I can save staff meeting for, strategic planning instead of like talking through the things that can happen online. And so he's already, like, I already jumped in. He's already building out his first kind of week-to-week communication piece using the Trained Up course builder platform. So there's lots of different ways that leadership development at the senior level can be assisted by some of the Trained Up courses that already exist. We've got a lot of leadership training pieces that are just tactical skills training, so that, things like communication and project planning and stress management and time management and that kind of stuff. And then there's, on the other side, there's a way to be able to build out Trained Up courses that support a book reading habit or a book reading assignment. And also, a way to be able to let it support coaching sessions at different levels of the pipeline as well.
Yeah. So it has some flexibility. This isn't hey, we just slap something together, you throw some videos in, y'all have created some things and Trained Up that churches can use, nor are you saying, hey, it just has to be our stuff, which I think some people will go, well, I mean, my tribe's different than yours. We have a unique philosophy of ministry and all that type of stuff. What I hear you saying is, we're providing some things for you that we believe that can help you. And we're also creating space for you to absolutely customize this and make it your own and make it exactly what your church and what your leaders need.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, the best churches that are getting the most value out of it are able to take what the courses and the videos that we've prepared and built for them. They take those and import those, and then they add their own videos to them. So, if, with any course in our system, you can add to or remove any of our videos from our courses. And what they're doing is they're taking our courses, they're reviewing our videos to make sure that they match up with doctrine and language and culture and all that kind of stuff. And then they add their own addendum, or they add their own. They prepend a video, they append a video, and it makes it goes from something kind of generic, which is honestly, our stuff is purposefully generic. Right now it's got to apply to 700 churches. 700 churches have to be able to find some value in it, I should say. And at the same time, find value in it, but then customize it with your own face, your own language as the pastor. If it's communication skills, or if it's introduction to volunteering in a church or something like that. We have our own generic kind of best practices and biblical nature of volunteering, but also you can, with your own language and vision and culture, add your own words to it. Add your own video at the beginning, introduce the topic, add a video in the middle of it if you want to, expand on something that we hit on. If you want to change the language and say, well, in the last video you watched and they said this, they said to always be ready, with your shirt on. Well, we don't use shirts, but we do use name tags. And so you can kind of customize it and make it fit your own culture and your own needs as you need to.
Yeah. So there are going to be churches, and you have these conversations a lot, where somebody says, I see the value of it, but one of the values that we have is kind of face-to-face, in person, like we're a family. And so I'm just concerned that maybe we'd be doing too much digital. So how do you help a church kind of figure out the advantages, like what needs to be digital, what needs to be face-to-face? Like, how do you make those decisions? How do you choose which type of training that needs to happen in a room together across the table, both people drink a cup of coffee or tea or whatever, and what is like a benefit to just doing something digitally?
So we draw a very clear line. In the past, we've been really nuanced about it, and we kind of say, feel it out. But you know what? After talking with hundreds and hundreds of ministry leaders, the really clear line is this. If it's just pure information transfer, it needs to be able to happen online. You need to be able to give your people the freedom to absorb the information in a time frame that fits their schedule, especially with busy schedules and kids in more and more sports and more travel and all that kind of stuff. So give them the ability to absorb and understand that content on their own time. But the stuff that can't happen online, the mentoring, the community building, the fellowship, all that kind of stuff, the hard conversation about their last church and why they are hesitant to volunteer again, or why they're hesitant to become a room leader, or why they're hesitant to become a small group leader. All the stuff that needs to be a conversation, let that happen over coffee. But don't let your coffee time be taken up with reviewing a handbook. To me, it makes no sense at all if I'm going to schedule as a busy pastor, as a chock full children's ministry leader. I've got a limited number of hours. Why would I go over the same content over and over again in either a one-on-one context, or a weekly meeting, or a monthly meeting, and waste my time and waste their time by going over the same content over and over again, when I can just let that be accessible online and use my valuable time to do just what I can do in person, which is the human to human conversations.
Yeah. So guys, again, I think the biggest takeaway in this conversation is that you want to invest in the right tools to build leaders around you. And sometimes that investment is going to be you personally sitting down with somebody across the table, talking about those things, and doing a good job of pastoring, shepherding, caring for people, following up on specific questions that they might have. But I think that if you are having things, as Scott said, information transfer, conversations that you have to have with everybody, or you have to have frequently with people, then it makes sense to use a digital platform like Trained Up to be able to basically make this happen in a way in which it not only saves you time and energy, it saves them time and energy. They're not having to come to you. They're not having to walk into this one big mass kind of information exchange where they have to leave their house, come to a building, sit in that room, and then go home. And then what do you do about the people that missed? And so to me, this is an incredibly smart investment that technology has really been able to make possible for us in ways that weren't possible 10 years ago. And so I love the resource. I think it's fantastic. Talk a little bit about kind of where you see things going next, maybe the next 12, 18 months for Trained Up.
Honestly, we are honed in, drilled into volunteer training and leadership development. We have found that there is, just it may not be the right season for every church, but every church does some kind of training. And so there's a lot more that we can do to help ministry leaders to train better. And not, like I said in the beginning, it doesn't always mean that a church signs up and pays us money to use our software to access our library. Sometimes it just means a phone call to help them kind of feel like they can organize their thoughts around something that feels a lot, pretty overwhelming. And sometimes it means that a church signs up for a season and then they cancel their account or they pause their account for a little while and then they come back to it later when they need to do more training again. And all of that kind of stuff, every church that does training, which is literally every church, will find at some point that there is a need to organize and to kind of coalesce their thoughts around training. And if that means that you come to our website and you chat with us, you chat with me or one of our, the other people on the team, we can help you walk through organizing your thoughts. We can help you walk through exploring online training with Trained Up, or if Trained Up is maybe too robust for you, maybe you don't need all, the accountability level. You don't need all the storage space for video. You don't need to access our videos, and you just need to put online a handbook online and a feedback form or something like that. We can help you with that as well. Yeah. Again, we're a business. We're a for-profit business. We have a product called Trained Up. It's a software platform, but I talk with, like I said, we talk with ministry leaders all week long that are just looking for some guidance, some help organizing the overwhelming nature of wanting to do a good job equipping the saints for the work of ministry.
Yeah. And you and Kevin and the team do a great job. So let's do some expectation management for somebody who's driving down the road. The link is in the show notes, guys, to go to trainedup.church at some point in time. When they get there, do some expectation management for them in terms of they're interested, they want to learn more, what's going to be the best way for them to really be able to make a fully informed decision about online training and then maybe working with Trained Up.
Cool. So when you get to the site, there's a big button at the top that says demo. You click the demo button and we have a little chat bot. It's a little, the Trained Up helper is what we call them. And it pops a little chat bot. You can talk to the chat bot about, give them your email address and tell them a little bit about your church. And then they'll give you a link where you can watch the demo or go through the demo yourself. It's 2 or 3 videos that just kind of walk through the features. And then at the end, it tells you about pricing and how it works and, with church and with your church. As far as pricing, what it's going to cost, it's $49 a month to get started. Most churches start at $49 a month. If you need more advanced features, some larger churches need more advanced user management and mainly around user management. And then, of course, much larger churches or multi-site churches need some of our multi-site features that help churches that have identical ministries with different ministry leaders at different campuses. And so we have some features that help churches like that, and that's kind of higher up in the tiers. But any church can get started for $49 a month. And it comes with, full chat support, phone support if it's an emergency, email support on the weekends, unlimited access for unlimited learners, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So guys, here's one way to think about that is if you have 49 volunteers in your church, the question is, are you willing to invest $1 per volunteer a month to help them do a great work? And if they do great work, then that's going to help your church do the work that you want it to do. So at the very least, I think it's worth going over to trainedup.church and watching the demo and seeing if it's worth a conversation, see if it's worth diving into and checking it out. I think it's a fantastic resource. Again, what are we trying to do? We absolutely are convinced that church leaders need the right team of leaders around them. It's not just having enough, but you need enough of the right kind of leaders. And those are going to be leaders that are well recruited, they're well trained, they're well encouraged. And so we are absolutely committed to putting the best resources around you and in your hands to help you to do that. And so I think what Trained Up is doing is absolutely the right resource for you. So Scott, I want to let you have the last word here in just a minute, but one of the things I just want to acknowledge you for is one, the gift of design that God's given you. And I also think just the passion to dig into the nuances of volunteer training, seeing that as valuable and being able to create something that is significant and helpful and affordable to churches and church leaders. So I'm really grateful that you created it. I'm grateful for you.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate that. What's funny is when I started this, my idea was to solve a problem that I had and realized that maybe there's some other churches that have the same problem. And I was thinking about it from an efficiency perspective. Like, how can I get the training done that needs to get done without having to book another meeting or put more meetings on the schedule? And over time, God has done something in me that he's made me passionate about and cared deeply about Ephesians 4:12. That we have a responsibility. It's not just a good suggestion that, one of the things you probably should think about as a church leader is equipping the saints for the work of ministry. It's really become to me a mantra or a mandate for ministry leaders, to the point of, even in my own ministry, kind of moving from a ministry doer and saying, I don't do ministry anymore. I'm an equipper of ministers. And I have one area where I do ministry. I'm a preacher and I That's my ministry that I do. And then everything else is equipping others to do ministry. And so that's become sort of a, I guess mantra is maybe the best way to put it, is that we really, I mean, even my hat is equip. Like we just work on that word equip. And if we can help pastors equip the saints for the work of ministry, then we're doing our job.
That's good. That's great. Well, you're doing good work, and look forward to just seeing how God continues to use you in the lives of our listeners and other pastors out there. So I appreciate you, man. Well, thanks again to Scott Magdalein for taking time out of his schedule to spend with you and me and to help us reimagine what's available to us in order to train the volunteer leaders in our church. If you're curious about Trained Up, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go to fivefactors.net/39, and that will take you to the show notes where you can click on a link and you can go over to trainedup.church and you can watch a demo of the platform. You can learn exactly what's available to you in terms of training your volunteer leaders, and then I'm hoping that you'll jump in and you'll become part of what they're doing. I think it's a fantastic resource for you. It's really easy to think that we need to reinvent the wheel, and it's really easy to think that somehow we're varsity if we're creating our own thing. I would just encourage you to leverage what really smart people with really unique skills who can develop a platform like this and create content that will help you and basically create a platform where you can add your own content to train your own leaders. I think that this is a perfect solution for so many churches, and I think you should absolutely go at least check it out, watch the demo, talk to Scott and his team. They absolutely want to help and serve you because look, here's the leadership secret. You should absolutely invest in the right tools in order to build the leaders that you need, the right kind of leaders around you. And I think that Trained Up can absolutely be a resource for you. Now, one of the things that I would love for you to do if you haven't done already is that if you haven't left us a rating or review, this would help us immensely. If you'll go to fivefactors.net/podcast, if you'll leave us a rating, that's going to allow more people to see that we exist, and it's going to allow more people to hear these kind of conversations to help them grow and thrive as a church leader. So it's a very small, simple way for you to be generous, and we love to get your reviews as well. It's an opportunity for me, for Tal, for everybody that's involved in this to continue to do our best work so that we can continue to serve you. That's our commitment. The reason why we do this week in and week out is because we want to do all that we can to help you thrive as a leader. We really do want you to build a great church. We want you to build an even better life. That's the entire reason that this 5 Factors framework exists. That's the entire reason our platform is here, is because we want to help you. So those are 2 very small ways that you can help us help you. If you'll go to fivefactors.net/podcast, leave us a rating and review, we'd appreciate it. A lot of other people would appreciate it too, because this is going to enable them to see it thanks to the fancy Apple podcast algorithm that I won't even begin to understand. But it's the way it works, kids, and so we're very, very grateful for the opportunity to be able to get this into your ears week in and week out. So next week, we're going to have a fantastic conversation with Brian Miles from Belay. We're going to talk about a different way for you to think about your staff culture and a little bit of the secret sauce that Brian has discovered leading one of the best companies in the country in terms of culture. And so I think you're going to learn a lot. It's a fun conversation. Can't wait for you to hear it. And so until then, I hope you have a fantastic day. God bless you wherever you are. And we'll see you next Monday morning on the next episode of the 5 Factors Podcast.